When it comes to choosing a subcompact SUV, there are a lot of great options on the market. However, if you're on a budget, you might be wondering which ones are the best bang for your buck. In this video, we'll take a look at 8 of the best subcompact SUVs that you can find for under $25,000. Number 1. 2022 Toyota Corolla Cross. The Toyota Corolla Cross is an all-new subcompact crossover that combines the comfortable ride of a sedan with the cargo versatility of an SUV. It has an affordable starting price and good fuel economy, but rear seating is snug, and options are limited. The Toyota Corolla Cross is a 5-seater vehicle that comes in 3 trim levels. The most popular style is the LFWD, which starts at $23,780 and comes with a 2.0 Li4 engine and front-wheel drive. This Corolla Cross is estimated to deliver 31 mpg in the city and 33 mpg on the highway. The Toyota Corolla Cross is an entry-level crossover that offers a solid list of standard features at an affordable price. It's an excellent option for singles or couples who don't often use the rear seats for adult passengers. It also has plenty of standard safety features, giving you peace of mind at a lower cost. The engine is modest though responsive, and it gets good fuel economy, making fill-ups more tolerable for owners with tight budgets. The Corolla Cross has an attractive interior that includes a standard 7-inch infotainment touchscreen and eye-catching materials despite being an entry-level vehicle. Number 2. 2022 Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross. The Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross comes with a low price, exceptional warranty coverage, and a long list of standard features. But overall, it's less polished and less potent than its rivals. The Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross is a 5-seater vehicle that comes in 6 trim levels. The most popular style is the SFWD, which starts at $24,990 and comes with a 1.5 Li4 turbo engine and front-wheel drive. This Eclipse Cross is estimated to deliver 26 mpg in the city and 29 mpg on the highway. People in the market for a small SUV are often on the hunt for value. The 2022 Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross does well on this front, offering accessible pricing and lots of standard amenities, but it is behind the pack in other areas. These are all points to consider when deciding if the Eclipse Cross is suitable for you. Number 3. 2022 Volkswagen Taos. The 2022 Volkswagen Taos is an all-new subcompact crossover in the German brand's lineup. Its long list of available features and low initial price are attractive, but it doesn't match some of its competitors when it comes to standard safety technology. The Volkswagen Taos is a 5-seater vehicle that comes in 3 trim levels. The most popular style is the SFWD, which starts at $24,790 and comes with a 1.5 Li4 turbo engine and front-wheel drive. This Taos is estimated to deliver 28 mpg in the city and 36 mpg on the highway. The Volkswagen Taos is a new entry in the increasingly popular subcompact utility class. The Taos comfortable 5-passenger seating with plenty of luggage room. Its handy size makes it a good urban vehicle, but it is equally comfortable on the open road, with a smooth ride and precise handling. The Taos offers more horsepower than its similar-size competitors, so it has an added pep. Number 4. 2022 Hyundai Venue. The Hyundai Venue isn't just small in size, it also boasts one of the smallest price tags of any new car. Even so, this nimble little SUV isn't lacking in space or features. The Hyundai Venue is a 5-seater vehicle that comes in 3 trim levels. The most popular style is the Limited IVT, which starts at $23,545 and comes with a 1.6 Li4 engine and front-wheel drive. This Venue is estimated to deliver 29 mpg in the city and 33 mpg on the highway. The Hyundai Venue, which first appeared in 2020, is the South Korean automaker's smallest SUV, but the Venue's boxy shape, the cabin offers room for 4 adults, 5 in a pinch, with enough space remaining for a few bags behind the 60/40th split folding second row. Though saddled with some cheap-looking hard plastics, the interior is nevertheless a pleasant place to be, with an attractive design, a good infotainment system, and a surprising number of standard features, especially on the higher trims. Before you load one up for a long road trip, though, know that its 1.6-liter engine tends to run out of breath at freeway speeds. Still, the thrifty 4-cylinder is lively enough around town, and that's where the Venue really shines. Thanks to its short wheelbase and large windows, the Venue is a great urban runabout, capable of tidy U-turns and easy parking. It also boasts Hyundai's long standard warranty, as well as free maintenance for the first 3 years or 36,000 miles. Number 5. 2022 Nissan Kicks. The Nissan Kicks brings a fun personality and youthful styling to the exploding compact crossover class. It's also easy to recommend because it is well equipped with standard safety features, and it's priced below many of its key competitors. The Nissan Kicks is a 5-seater vehicle that comes in 3 trim levels. The most popular style is the SV, which starts at $23,145 and comes with a 1.6 Li4 engine and front-wheel drive. These Kicks are estimated to deliver 31 mpg in the city and 36 mpg on the highway. The Nissan Kicks is the brand's smallest and most affordable crossover. It sits in the heart of the compact crossover class, offering seating for 5, impressive cargo space, and a low starting price. Its standout styling gives the Kicks a fun, youthful vibe. It provides plenty of standard features, including Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, blind spot warning, and automatic emergency braking with pedestrian detection. Its small engine doesn't have thrilling acceleration, but it's extremely fuel efficient, making the Kicks perfect for commuters. Number 6. 2022 Ford EcoSport. The Ford EcoSport is a pint-sized sport ute with an appealing price tag, but it's outclassed by most rivals in this highly competitive category. The Ford EcoSport is a 5-seater vehicle that comes in 4 trim levels. The most popular style is the S, which starts at $23,335 and comes with a 2.0 Li4 engine and 4-wheel drive. This EcoSport is estimated to deliver 23 mpg in the city and 29 mpg on the highway. The EcoSport is Ford's smallest SUV, but the subcompact SUV packs a surprising amount of utility into its diminutive shape, with standard all-wheel drive, a relatively large cargo area, and a 2,000-pound tow rating, the highest in its class. Its 2.0-liter 4-cylinder engine provides reasonable motivation, routing power to all 4 wheels via a traditional 6-speed automatic transmission. The fuel economy is underwhelming for such a small vehicle, though, lagging behind most in its class. Though billed as a 5-seater, the EcoSport's rear seat can be tight for tall adults. The front seats are spacious and comfy. All but the base trim level comes well equipped with basic comforts, including Ford's easy-to-use Sync 3 infotainment system, including forward collision warning and automatic emergency braking. Number 7. 2022 Chevrolet Trax. The Chevrolet Trax is a sweet-natured little crossover that anchors the bottom rung of the Chevy lineup. It's a good city car, and with optional all-wheel drive, the Trax can take on all weather, too. The Chevrolet Trax is a 5-seater vehicle that comes in 2 trim levels. The most popular style is the LSAWD, which starts at $23,215 and comes with a 1.4 Li4 turbo engine and all-wheel drive. This Trax is estimated to deliver 23 mpg in the city and 30 mpg on the highway. The subcompact SUV class has been booming for the past several years. The Trax stands out in one of the most important ways: its space efficiency. There's plenty of room for passengers up front and in the backseat, too. Plus, you can carry quite a bit of cargo with the rear seats folded down. With a tiny footprint, the Trax is easy to drive and park, so it makes a great city vehicle. Yet it isn't particularly sporty, nor does it ride that well. Number 8. 2022 Mitsubishi Outlander Sport. The Mitsubishi Outlander Sport is a handsome, fun, and practical small SUV that offers ample standard features and an exceptional warranty for a modest price. The Mitsubishi Outlander Sport is a 5-seater vehicle that comes in 7 trim levels. The most popular style is the S2.0 FWD CVT, which starts at $24,740 and comes with a 2.0 Li4 engine and front-wheel drive. This Outlander Sport is estimated to deliver 24 mpg in the city and 30 mpg on the highway. The Outlander Sport is Mitsubishi's smallest and most affordable SUV. It impresses with a very attractive design, a long list of standard features, and a notable 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. That's a longer warranty than you'll get with most rivals. The Outlander Sport also features a big cargo area, comfortable seats, and solid fuel economy. Its infotainment system is easy to use, and Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone integration are available. The Outlander Sport is fun to drive. The Mitsubishi's 148 horsepower 2.0-liter 4-cylinder engine can be loud when accelerating, and its ride quality isn't quite as comfortable as its top competitors. So this is the list of top 8 best subcompact SUVs. I hope you like this video. For more SUV-related videos, click any video of them, and subscribe for great content.